The rich rancher rode in to collect a debt, only to find a young widow with 5 children. Jonathan McAllister had always been a man of wealth, reputation, and discipline. In the wide sunburned lands of Willow Creek, his name was known by every rancher, farmer, and merchant. He owned acres upon acres of fertile land, herds of cattle that stretched farther than the eye could see, and a house so grand it seemed like a palace compared to the modest homes of most townsfolk. But for all his riches, Jonathan's life was governed by rules of business, of respect, and of keeping one's word. That was why he was riding into town that morning, his boots polished, his hat casting a shadow over his stern face, and his horse's hooves raising little clouds of dust along the empty dirt road. He was there on a single, serious mission, to collect a debt. The debt had been owed by Mr. Harper, a man Jonathan had known slightly in passing. Harper was a hard-working farmer known for his stubbornness and pride, and he had borrowed a significant sum from Jonathan to expand his small farm a few years ago. Jonathan had expected repayment on time, as he always did, but life had its own way of twisting plans. Mr. Harper had fallen ill and, unfortunately, passed away not long ago. With Harper gone, the responsibility of settling his debts now fell on someone else. Jonathan had imagined he would find either an empty house or perhaps some distant relative who would quickly arrange the payment. He was prepared for frustration, but not for what he was about to encounter. As Jonathan approached the Harper homestead, the sight that greeted him was far from what he had expected. The small farmhouse sat at the edge of a modest plot of land, surrounded by a few struggling crops and a tiny garden. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, and the wooden fence around the yard sagged in several places. But more than the house itself, it was the movement in the yard that caught Jonathan's attention. A young woman, slender but strong, moved quickly, carrying buckets of water from the well to the garden. Around her, 5 small children ran and played, their laughter ringing clear, yet tinged with the seriousness of a life that demanded responsibility far too early. Jonathan dismounted from his horse, the leather of his boots crunching on the dry earth. He adjusted his hat and walked slowly toward the front porch, intending to introduce himself formally. The young woman, noticing the arrival of a stranger, paused for a moment. Her eyes, sharp and alert, met Jonathan's. There was a fire in them, a strength that seemed almost unnatural for someone so young. Her hair was tied back, streaked with a few strands of gray, and her hands were calloused from labor. But it wasn't just the physical appearance that struck him. It was the determination in her gaze, the way she stood straight despite the weight of her world pressing down on her shoulders. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Jonathan McAllister. I've come regarding the debt owed by your late husband, Mr. Harper." His voice was calm, but carried the authority he had cultivated over years of commanding respect. He expected a simple acknowledgement, perhaps some quiet agreement to discuss repayment. But the woman's response was unexpected. "I know why you've come," she said, her voice steady, though there was a hint of weariness beneath it. "I am Clara Harper. My husband is gone, and I am doing my best to keep the farm and care for my children. I cannot pay what is owed right now." She didn't beg or plead. She simply stated her situation as if it were a fact, undeniable and immovable. Her children clustered near her feet, curious but cautious, watching the interaction with wide eyes. Jonathan's first reaction was irritation. In all his years of business, he had rarely encountered defiance, even in grief. People usually responded to him with respect or fear. But Clara was different. There was no fear in her eyes, no desperate submission. She met him as an equal, a woman who had faced life's harshest realities head-on. For a moment he was taken aback. It was as if he had walked into a storm he hadn't anticipated, and the intensity of it caught him off guard. He looked around the yard. The children were small, ranging from a baby barely able to walk to a boy of about 10 who was attempting to help his mother with chores. The youngest clutched at Clara's skirts, while the older ones ran errands and played with the tools and scraps scattered around the yard. Jonathan could see immediately that she was struggling. The garden was small, the fences broken, and the barn in the distance looked like it had survived one too many storms. This was not the home of a man who could quickly repay his debts. It was the home of a woman who was barely holding on. For a long moment, Jonathan didn't speak. He had been prepared for confrontation, for negotiation, perhaps even for anger. But Clara's quiet strength left him unsure. There was something in her presence, something human and raw, that challenged his usual approach. He had expected numbers, calculations, a simple transaction, but instead he found life itself, messy and demanding, staring back at him. Clara continued with her chores as if he were invisible, though her eyes never left his. She moved with purpose, carrying pails of water, feeding the chickens, and tending the small plot of vegetables. Jonathan watched, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and unease. It was clear that she was doing everything she could to keep her family alive. There was no time for tears, no room for weakness, just the constant motion of survival. Each task she performed seemed to carry not only the weight of her family's needs, but the weight of her own grief. Jonathan finally spoke again. "Miss Harper, I need to discuss the debt. I am here as a businessman, but I must admit I am not entirely sure how to proceed." His words were honest, a rarity for him. Clara paused, turning fully toward him. "I cannot pay what was owed, Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice firm. "But I will do everything I can to honor my husband's memory and take care of these children. If that is not enough for you, I cannot force it to be. Debuting here." Her words struck him more deeply than he expected. There was pride in her tone, pride not in wealth or status, but in her unyielding commitment to her family. Jonathan had always respected strength, but this was different. This was strength born from necessity, from love, from survival. He found himself reassessing not only the situation, but his own assumptions about what it meant to be powerful and responsible. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Jonathan noticed the way the children moved around their mother, helping where they could, watching her closely. It was a household filled with struggle, yes, but also with love, resilience, and an unspoken promise. They would survive. Watching this, Jonathan felt a shift inside him. The mission he had arrived with, to collect a debt, suddenly seemed less important than understanding the people who depended on it. Clara approached him slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I do not wish to cheat anyone," she said. "If there is some way to make arrangements, to find a solution that keeps my family safe, I am willing to work, but I cannot pay what I do not have." There was no plea in her tone, only honesty. Jonathan realized that honesty of this kind was rare. It was stronger than any document or contract. It carried the weight of human life itself. Jonathan nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. He had come with the certainty of a man used to commanding outcomes, but he was now faced with complexity, with the real consequences of life and death, not just numbers in a ledger. He felt a strange respect for Clara, a recognition of the burden she carried without complaint. She had survived loss, she was caring for 5 children, and she did so with unwavering determination. That was something money could not buy, and it was a lesson Jonathan would not forget. For the rest of the morning, he stayed on the porch, observing Clara and her children, asking questions about their lives, their routines, and their needs. The conversation was not about debt, at least not entirely. It was about survival, about resilience, and about the human spirit. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. This visit would not be simple, and the outcome would not be determined by contracts or obligations alone. He mounted his horse at the end of the day, his mind heavy with thought. He had come expecting to enforce the law of debt, but he was leaving with a profound respect for the strength of a young widow and her 5 children. For Jonathan McAllister, this was the beginning of an unexpected journey, a journey that would challenge not only his business sense, but his understanding of compassion, responsibility, and the true meaning of wealth. Little did he know this meeting was the first of many that would shape his life and theirs in ways neither could have predicted. And for Clara Harper, it was the start of a chapter in her life that would bring help, hope, and perhaps an unexpected ally in the man who had once arrived only to collect a debt. Jonathan McAllister returned to the Harper homestead the next morning with a sense of unease he had never felt before. He had spent the night thinking about Clara and her children, their small house, the tired expressions on their faces, and the dignity with which they carried themselves. Normally, a business trip to collect a debt would have been routine, but this was different. The thought of forcing this family into hardship weighed heavily on him. For the first time in years, Jonathan questioned whether his wealth and power were truly the measures of strength, or if courage could exist in forms far smaller, quieter, yet no less real. As he rode down the dusty road leading to the farm, he noticed the same sounds as the day before: the low bleat of goats in the pen, the soft clucking of chickens, and the laughter of children carried on the morning breeze. Clara was already outside, hauling buckets of water from the well. She glanced up briefly, saw Jonathan approaching, and gave a small nod. There was no smile, no greeting beyond recognition, but Jonathan could feel the quiet strength radiating from her, as if she were silently saying, "I will manage, no matter what comes." Jonathan dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post, dusting off his coat. He had prepared himself to talk about numbers, interest, and repayment schedules. But as he looked around, he saw not just a family in financial trouble, but a family surviving against the odds. Clara's hands were raw and calloused from endless labor, and yet she moved with purpose. The children scurried around, each doing a small task. The oldest, a boy of 10 named Samuel, carried firewood, while the middle children helped water the small garden. The youngest, barely walking, toddled behind Clara, clutching her skirts and giggling at something unseen. Jonathan's first words were formal, but he couldn't keep the usual business tone he always relied upon. "Miss Harper, I came yesterday to discuss your husband's debt. I understand your situation, but I need to know how we can move forward." His voice sounded almost gentle to his own ears, which surprised him. Clara stopped mid-motion and turned to face him, her face calm yet firm. "I told you yesterday, Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice steady. "I cannot pay what is owed. I will work as hard as I can to support my family, but the money simply isn't there. I am willing to talk, yes, but I cannot promise what I do not have." Jonathan studied her carefully. There was no hesitation in her words, no attempt to avoid responsibility. She wasn't trying to cheat him. She was facing the truth. Her honesty and determination made him realize that her fight was not against him, but against life itself. Jonathan had met many people in his years, but few had carried so much responsibility with such grace. Over the next few hours he stayed at the farm, observing Clara and her children. He helped where he could, though he knew his presence alone could not solve all their problems. He repaired a fence post that had been broken in the wind, guided the children in stacking firewood safely, and even helped Clara lift a heavy sack of grain into the small barn. Each task revealed more about the daily struggles this family endured, how they measured every ounce of flour, how they rationed water, and how Clara, despite exhaustion, never allowed the children to feel fear. Jonathan realized that survival was an art for this woman. She could make a small garden, feed 6 mouths, mend torn clothes, and find joy in small things. He noticed the children laughing despite the hardships, the way they leaned on one another, and the pride in Samuel's eyes when he managed to carry the firewood without spilling a single stick. This was a family that refused to break, no matter how heavy the world's weight pressed on them. As the day went on, Jonathan began asking Clara more personal questions, carefully avoiding anything that might seem intrusive. He wanted to understand her life, not just the financial side. "How did you manage all this after your husband passed?" he asked quietly. Clara paused, looking out over the fields for a moment before answering. "It hasn't been easy," she said softly, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. "Some days I feel I can't do it. But I have these children. They depend on me. If I falter, they suffer, so I keep going, one task at a time. Some neighbors help sometimes, but most days, it's just us." Jonathan listened, feeling a growing admiration for her resilience. He had seen wealth, power, and influence, but he had rarely seen courage like hers. She was not fighting for comfort, not for status, not for admiration. She was fighting simply to keep her family alive. That realization struck him deeply. He understood now that the real measure of strength was not in riches or dominance, but in the ability to endure hardship and continue loving and caring for others despite it. Throughout the day, he began to notice little details that spoke volumes about Clara's character, how she gently scolded the children when they squabbled, but also praised them for helping, how she carefully checked the small garden for weeds, knowing that even a few lost vegetables could make a difference, how she sang softly to the youngest child when he cried, soothing him with melodies that seemed to calm both the heart and the spirit. Jonathan had seen mothers before, but Clara's balance of tenderness and determination was something extraordinary. By late afternoon, Jonathan felt a change within himself. He had come to collect a debt, expecting resistance or at least a simple discussion of payment plans. Instead, he had witnessed a life of struggle, sacrifice, and dignity. He realized that forcing this family into immediate repayment would not only be unfair, it would be cruel. Clara and her children were already living a life of hardships most adults could not endure. Jonathan had a choice to make: follow the law strictly or allow compassion to guide his actions. Before leaving that evening, Jonathan offered a suggestion, careful to frame it as a proposal rather than a command. "Miss Harper, I cannot pretend to understand the full extent of your struggles," he said. "But perhaps we can find a way to manage this debt gradually. I will consider options that allow you to keep the farm and care for your children. It will take time, patience, and cooperation. Are you willing to try?" Clara looked at him thoughtfully, her eyes reflecting both relief and skepticism. "If it is truly a fair plan, I am willing to try," she replied. "I only ask that you understand we are doing our best, every day, just to survive." Jonathan nodded. For the first time, he felt a sense of respect and partnership forming. This was no longer a simple matter of money. It was about humanity, empathy, and recognizing the strength in someone who had every reason to give up but refused to. Before he left, he lingered for a moment, observing the children once more. Each one seemed to carry a small piece of Clara's courage. Samuel had already begun organizing the tools in the barn, eager to help his mother. The girls helped water the garden and collected eggs, while the youngest toddled happily beside Clara. Jonathan realized that this family, though struggling, was resilient. They had something wealth could not buy: unity, love, and unwavering determination. As he rode back to his ranch that evening, Jonathan's mind was busy with thoughts. He knew he would have to find a solution that balanced fairness with compassion. More than that, he realized that Clara Harper had taught him a lesson he could not learn in any office, through contracts or accounts. True strength came from heart, courage, and an unyielding will to care for others. That night, as Jonathan lay in his bed overlooking his sprawling property, he found sleep elusive. He thought of Clara, the children, and the quiet farm that had welcomed him, despite his initial purpose of collection. He understood that the coming days would be difficult, that plans would have to be made, and that trust would need to be built. But he also knew that he was no longer just a rancher arriving to collect a debt. He was becoming part of a story far bigger than numbers, a story of human endurance, compassion, and hope. And so, with a mix of determination and curiosity, Jonathan prepared himself for the days ahead. He would return to the Harper farm not just as a man seeking repayment, but as someone willing to help, guide, and perhaps in some small way protect a family that had already shown him what true strength looked like. Little did he know, the coming weeks would challenge him more than any business negotiation ever could. He would see hardship, joy, struggle, and resilience in ways that would leave an indelible mark on his heart. And Clara, too, would learn that help could come from the most unexpected places, even from the very man who had once arrived only to collect a debt. Days passed after Jonathan's first visit to the Harper homestead, and life seemed to settle into a strange rhythm. Jonathan found himself thinking of Clara more often than he expected. Her quiet courage, the way she managed her children, and the dignity with which she faced life's hardships lingered in his mind. He could not help but compare her strength with the wealth, power, and influence he had spent his life accumulating. In all his dealings and negotiations, he had never met anyone like her. She was not concerned with riches or status. She was concerned only with survival, care, and love for her children. That realization weighed on him heavily and shifted something deep within him. Jonathan returned to the Harper farm early one morning, hoping to speak with Clara about possible arrangements for the debt. But as he rode closer, he noticed something troubling. The barn, already worn by storms and age, had a large hole in the roof, and some of the wooden beams had been weakened. The chickens had wandered from their pen, and the garden showed signs of being trampled by the children's attempts to clear a small flooded section. Jonathan felt a knot in his stomach. Life on the farm was already hard, and the damage meant even more work for Clara and her family. He dismounted quickly and ran toward the house, calling out for Clara. She appeared almost immediately, carrying a basket of eggs, her apron covered in dirt and her hair slightly undone. The children were nearby, trying to help, but the youngest had begun to cry. Clara noticed Jonathan and wiped her hands on her apron, attempting to smile, though exhaustion lined her face. "Mr. McAllister," she greeted quietly. "It's been a rough night with the storm." The barn took some damage, and the garden, well, we'll manage as best we can. Jonathan looked around, taking in the extent of the damage. He could feel frustration rising, not toward Clara, but toward the world that seemed determined to challenge her at every turn. Yet even in the midst of hardship, there was no despair on Clara's face, only determination. She had learned long ago that worry alone could not fix broken roofs or flooded fields. She rolled up her sleeves and continued her work, showing Jonathan that even exhaustion would not stop her. "I see you've been busy," Jonathan said carefully, not wanting to seem intrusive, but needing to acknowledge the situation. "This storm, it could make things even more difficult for you and the children. Have you thought about getting help?" "We do what we can ourselves. Some neighbors may help when they can, but we cannot rely on anyone. This is our responsibility. I have to make sure these children have a home and some food. That is my job now." Her words struck Jonathan deeply. He realized that she bore not only the physical labor of managing the farm, but the entire weight of responsibility for the survival and happiness of 5 children. Each task she performed was more than work. It was a commitment, an act of love and courage. Jonathan knew he had to act, but he also understood that his actions needed to be thoughtful. He couldn't simply give money or take over her farm. That would diminish her dignity and her strength. He had to find a way to help without taking away her independence. So he began to assist in small ways, offering practical solutions rather than charity. Together, they began repairing the barn. Jonathan lifted heavy beams alongside Clara, showing her techniques to stabilize the roof and prevent further damage. The children, curious and eager to help, were given small tasks like carrying nails or sweeping the floor. During these hours, Jonathan observed more of Clara's character. She was patient with the children, teaching them how to work carefully while still laughing when mistakes happened. She corrected them gently, never raising her voice, yet she expected attention and effort from them. Jonathan realized that this balance was rare. It required wisdom, strength, and a deep understanding of human nature. A parent not simply give orders, she guided, taught, and inspired. Even in her exhaustion, she managed to create an environment of love, care, and discipline. As the sun climbed high, Jonathan took a moment to rest under the shade of a large oak tree. He watched Clara as she worked tirelessly, moving from task to task without pause. Her hands were raw from handling wood and rope, her face flushed with effort, but there was no complaint in her demeanor. Each time one of the children asked for guidance, she smiled and explained patiently, showing them the value of persistence and careful effort. Jonathan could not help but feel a growing admiration, not just for her hard work, but for the spirit behind it. The day wore on, and Jonathan found himself becoming more invested in the farm's success. He offered advice on efficient planting for the garden, methods to repair the fences, and techniques to reinforce the barn roof against future storms. Clara accepted his help graciously, asking questions and learning quickly. There was no tension, no sense of superiority from Jonathan, and no sense of helplessness from Clara. They worked together as partners, united by a common goal, keeping the family safe and the farm functional. By late afternoon, the barn was partially repaired, the garden looked better, and the children had learned new skills. Jonathan realized that even small accomplishments had a significant impact on Clara's life. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about giving hope, showing that the challenges they faced could be overcome with effort, patience, and guidance. Clara's resilience inspired him more than he expected, and he began to reflect on his own life. Wealth had given him comfort, but it had never taught him lessons like these. Here was a woman with nothing but determination, and yet she radiated a strength he had rarely witnessed. During a brief break, Clara offered Jonathan a glass of water. "You've been very helpful today," she said softly. "I don't usually accept help from strangers, but I can see that you are willing to work with us, not just give us money. I don't believe in giving what can be earned. You have done everything to care for your children and this farm. I only want to help you continue, without taking away what you have worked so hard to build." His words felt different than usual. There was no business calculation, no expectation of repayment, only a genuine desire to support someone whose courage and determination he could not ignore. As evening approached, Jonathan helped Clara secure the barn and feed the animals. The children, now tired from a long day of work and learning, sat quietly nearby, their faces glowing with satisfaction. They had accomplished something, just like their mother had taught them. Hard work led to results, and effort brought pride. Jonathan could see the bond between Clara and her children, a bond strengthened by adversity and nurtured by love. Before leaving, Jonathan spoke to Clara privately. "I want to continue helping, but I need you to trust me. I will not force anything upon you, and I will respect your independence. I only ask that we work together, for the sake of your family and the farm. Will you accept that?" Finally, she nodded. "I will accept your guidance and your help, as long as it respects what I am building for my family. We will work together." Her words carried strength, but also relief. She had been carrying the weight of survival alone for so long that a partnership, even with someone she barely knew, was a cautious hope for a better future. Jonathan left the farm that evening with a sense of purpose unlike anything he had experienced before. He had not only helped repair the physical structures of the farm, but he had begun to build trust and understanding. He realized that life was not measured solely by wealth or status, but by the connections we make, the guidance we offer, and the courage we inspire in others. Over the following days, Jonathan made regular visits to the Harper farm. Each day brought new challenges. The barn required more repairs, the garden had pests, and the children sometimes fell ill or argued over chores. But through every difficulty, Clara remained steadfast. Jonathan marveled at her patience and resolve. She never gave up, never complained, and never allowed her children to lose hope. Each visit deepened his respect for her, and he found himself learning from her example, that true leadership was not commanding others, but inspiring them through action and dedication. As the weeks went by, Jonathan's role in the farm became more of a mentor and friend than a creditor. He helped plan crops, taught Clara new farming techniques, and even showed the children how to care for animals safely. Slowly, he noticed changes. The children were more confident. The farm looked healthier, and Clara began to smile more often, her burdens shared by someone who genuinely cared. One evening, as Jonathan rode back to his ranch, he reflected on how much had changed. What had begun as a mission to collect a debt had evolved into something far greater. He had become part of a story of courage, resilience, and human connection. He realized that helping Clara and her family was not charity. It was an investment in hope, in determination, and in the strength of the human spirit. And as the sun set behind the hills of Willow Creek, Jonathan knew that the challenges ahead would be many, but the rewards, trust, friendship, and the quiet satisfaction of making a difference were far greater than any sum of money could ever be. Weeks passed since Jonathan had begun helping Clara and her children, and the Harper farm had started to show signs of hope. The barn was nearly repaired, the garden had started yielding vegetables again, and the children were learning new skills under both Clara's patient guidance and Jonathan's careful instruction. Yet, life in Willow Creek was never simple, and challenges always found a way to test even the strongest of hearts. One morning Jonathan rode to the Harper farm with his usual mix of curiosity and determination, expecting a routine day of work and planning. But as he approached the house, he noticed smoke rising from the far end of the property. Panic gripped his chest as he spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding with fear. As he drew closer, he saw the source. A small fire had started near the tool shed, likely caused by a spark from the repaired barn roof that had fallen onto dry wood. Flames licked the sides of the shed, and the wind threatened to spread the fire toward the barn and even the house. Clara was already there, carrying the baby, her eyes wide with alarm. The older children ran to fetch water, shouting instructions to one another. Jonathan leapt from his horse and ran to help, taking control of the chaotic scene. He grabbed buckets and started dousing the fire, while Clara guided the children safely away from danger. Despite the panic, Clara remained calm enough to organize the children, instructing them clearly but gently. "Samuel, fill the buckets carefully. Mary, stay with your sister and carry the water. We can handle this, just stay together." Jonathan felt his heart swell with admiration. Here was a woman who had faced storms, poverty, and loss, and yet even in the face of danger she remained composed and determined. Her courage was remarkable, and the children mirrored her calm strength, working together to fight the fire. Jonathan realized in that moment that Clara's influence extended far beyond simple survival. She was shaping the next generation into resilient, responsible individuals. Hours passed as they worked tirelessly to put out the fire. The tool shed suffered damage, but thanks to their combined effort, the barn and house were unharmed. Jonathan noticed sweat dripping from Clara's brow, her arms sore from lifting buckets. Yet she never complained. She simply nodded at him when he offered water, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister," she said softly. "I don't know what we would have done without you today." Jonathan shook his head. "No, Clara. You and your children did most of the work. I was just helping where I could." His voice carried genuine humility. He had helped many people before, but none had affected him like this family. The fire was not just a physical threat. It was a test of their resolve, and Clara had faced it without faltering. After the fire, Jonathan stayed longer than usual, helping to repair the damaged shed and reorganize the tools. The children, exhausted but proud, followed his instructions carefully. Samuel even managed to lift a heavy plank into place, grinning at Jonathan as if to say, "I did it." Mary and her siblings joined in, laughing and playing even as they worked. Jonathan realized that these moments of struggle and triumph were shaping bonds far stronger than any he had experienced in his own life. As evening fell, Clara invited Jonathan to sit on the porch with her, the children playing nearby. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the warmth of the day giving way to a cool breeze. For the first time, Clara allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. "I've faced so many hardships in the past months," she admitted, her voice soft. "I've been afraid that I could never keep this family together. But somehow we're still standing. And your help, it's made a difference." Jonathan looked at her, feeling a deep sense of connection. "Clara, I've learned more from you than I could ever teach you," he said honestly. "You've shown me what strength really is. Not wealth, not power, not authority, but courage, perseverance, and love. You and your children have taught me lessons I'll never forget." Clara smiled faintly, touched by his words. She had expected judgment when Jonathan first arrived, perhaps criticism or pressure. Instead, she had found understanding and partnership. "I never expected anyone to see it that way," she said quietly. "Most people just see a struggling woman and 5 children. They don't see the fight behind it, they don't see the hope." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching the children play. He felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a combination of respect, admiration, and a quiet affection that he had not allowed himself to feel in years. This was no longer just a matter of business or responsibility. It was about people, about family, about human connection. And for the first time, he realized that helping someone else could bring fulfillment greater than any wealth he had ever owned. Over the next few days, Jonathan became more involved in the farm, not as a manager, but as a partner. He brought new tools, suggested better planting techniques, and even helped organize a schedule so that Clara and the children could manage chores more efficiently. The farm began to thrive in small but meaningful ways. Crops grew taller, the barn was more secure, and the children became more confident in their abilities. Each day was a struggle, yes, but also a triumph, a proof that hard work and unity could overcome adversity. One afternoon, a traveling merchant came through Willow Creek, stopping by the Harper farm to sell supplies. He noticed the changes immediately. "Your farm looks different," he remarked to Clara. "Much healthier, much more organized. You've done well." Clara nodded, giving credit where it was due, but also recognizing her family's effort. Jonathan watched silently, feeling pride not for himself, but for the Harper family and their achievements. As the sun began to set once again, Jonathan walked with Clara around the garden, noticing the small improvements, the repaired fence, the flourishing vegetables, and even the chickens settled safely in their pen. "You've done an incredible job," he said softly. "This farm is surviving because of you, not because of anyone else." "We all did it together," she replied. "The children helped, you helped, and I tried my best. We survived because we refused to give up." Her words carried the weight of experience, of months spent fighting against hardship and loss. Jonathan realized that Clara's leadership was not about authority. It was about resilience, guidance, and the ability to inspire others to do their best. Later that evening, as the family gathered for a simple meal, Jonathan noticed the warmth in the house, the laughter of the children, the pride in Clara's eyes, and the sense of security that had begun to grow despite the difficulties. For Jonathan, it was a moment of revelation. He had come to collect a debt, expecting resistance or discomfort. Instead, he had found a family, a home, and a sense of purpose that transcended money or business. That night, Jonathan sat outside, looking up at the stars. He thought about the journey so far, the challenges, the small victories, and the bond he had begun to form with Clara and her children. He understood now that life's true value lay not in wealth or power, but in the courage to face hardship, the love shared among family, and the kindness extended to others. Clara had taught him that lesson without even trying. She had lived it every day. Little did Jonathan know, the days ahead would test them even further. Yet for the first time, he felt prepared, not just to face the practical challenges of the farm, but to stand beside Clara, helping her protect her family and learning from her every step of the way. The fire, the storms, the endless work, all of it had revealed a truth that could not be denied. Strength was not measured in dollars, but in heart. And as the night deepened over Willow Creek, Jonathan made a quiet promise to himself. He would not abandon his family. He would not view them as a debt to be collected or a problem to be solved. He would stand with them, helping in any way he could, and learning what it truly meant to care for others. In Clara Harper and her 5 children, he had discovered courage, resilience, and hope, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. The Harper farm had changed a great deal since Jonathan McAllister first rode into Willow Creek. The small, modest house, once worn and tired, now seemed full of life, laughter, and purpose. The barn, repaired and reinforced, stood as a testament to the hard work and determination of a family that refused to be broken. The garden, once sparse and struggling, now yielded vegetables in abundance, enough to feed the family and even share with neighbors. Most importantly, Clara and her children had found a rhythm, a sense of hope that had been missing for months. Jonathan rode to the farm early one morning, feeling a quiet anticipation. He had grown accustomed to the routine of helping, guiding, and observing, but today felt different. There was a sense of closure in the air, a feeling that the long struggle for survival was finally giving way to a future built on stability, trust, and resilience. As he approached, he saw Clara already outside, tending the garden with the children assisting her. Their movements were steady and confident, a far cry from the frantic energy of weeks before. "Good morning, Mr. McAllister," Samuel called out, his face bright with a smile. The other children waved, their eyes wide with curiosity and warmth. Jonathan smiled back, feeling a deep sense of belonging. Though he was an outsider by circumstance, he had become part of their lives, not as a ruler or a creditor, but as a mentor, a helper, and perhaps even a friend. Clara looked up as he approached, her face glowing in the morning sunlight. "Good morning," she said softly. "I see the garden is flourishing. The children have been helping a lot, haven't they?" Jonathan nodded. "They have. And so have you. This place, it feels alive now. There's hope here." Clara smiled faintly, a mix of pride and relief. "It has been hard. Very hard. But we've learned to work together, and somehow we've managed to survive." Her words carried the weight of months of struggle, yet also the triumph of perseverance. Jonathan realized that survival alone was not the greatest achievement. It was the ability to endure, learn, and grow stronger that defined true success. Over the next few hours, Jonathan helped with chores as usual, but there was a sense of ease in their work. Tasks that had once seemed overwhelming were now routine. The children moved confidently, knowing exactly what to do, and Clara's guidance was firm, yet gentle. Jonathan observed the harmony in their actions, feeling a deep respect for the way she had nurtured not only their physical needs but also their character and sense of responsibility. As they rested under the shade of an old oak tree, Clara spoke of her hopes for the future. "I want the children to have opportunities I never had," she said. "I want them to learn, to grow, and to follow their dreams. We've struggled for survival, but I want more than that now. I want happiness, stability, and freedom for them." Jonathan listened, feeling a stirring in his chest. Her vision was clear, her determination unwavering. He realized that the farm was more than a place to live. It was a foundation for a better life, built through resilience, hard work, and the courage to continue despite adversity. He also understood that his role in their lives had evolved. He was no longer just a helper. He was a witness to their journey, and in some ways a part of it. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan made arrangements to help secure the farm's financial future without compromising Clara's independence. He contacted suppliers and neighbors, arranging for materials at fair prices, and provided guidance on sustainable farming techniques. But he did so quietly, without fanfare or interference, ensuring that Clara remained the decision-maker. It was a delicate balance, but one she appreciated deeply. She felt supported without being overshadowed, a rare combination that strengthened both her confidence and trust in Jonathan. One evening, as the family gathered for a simple dinner, there was a sense of peace in the air. The children were laughing and sharing stories of their day's accomplishments, while Clara listened with pride and warmth. Jonathan joined them at the table, feeling a sense of belonging that had surprised him from the start. He realized that wealth and power had never given him this. A family united, a purpose shared, and the quiet satisfaction of witnessing growth and resilience firsthand. After the meal, Jonathan and Clara walked around the farm, discussing plans for the coming seasons. "The barn is strong now, and the garden is thriving," Jonathan noted. "With a little more effort, you could expand the crops and even sell some at the market. You have the ability to not only sustain yourselves, but to grow beyond survival." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "It's been a journey, hasn't it? From barely surviving to having a chance at a stable future. I never thought we would get here. The children and I have learned so much, not just about work, but about hope, patience, and resilience." He had witnessed the transformation firsthand, not just of the farm, but of Clara and her children. They had faced storms, fires, exhaustion, and despair, yet they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more united than ever. He realized that true wealth was not measured by money or land, but by the strength, love, and hope that people carry within themselves. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the fields, Jonathan and Clara sat on the porch, watching the children play. "You know," Jonathan said quietly, "I came here expecting to collect a debt, but what I found was far more valuable. I found courage, strength, and hope. And I've learned more from you and your children than I could ever teach in all my years as a rancher." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "And I've learned that even in the darkest times, help can come from the most unexpected places. You came here as a stranger, and you became a part of our lives. You've taught us lessons too, not just about farming or planning, but about trust, kindness, and partnership." Jonathan nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He understood now that the debt he had come to collect was not the most important thing. What mattered was the bond they had formed, the lives they had strengthened, and the hope they had nurtured together. Clara and her children had faced adversity with courage, and he had been fortunate to witness their resilience and contribute in his own small way. In the following months, the Harper farm continued to flourish. The children thrived in their studies and chores, learning the value of responsibility and cooperation. Clara's confidence grew, and she began to make long-term plans for the family's future. Jonathan remained a steady presence, offering guidance and support when needed, but always allowing Clara to lead. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect, trust, and understanding, a partnership forged through shared struggle and triumph. One crisp morning, as Jonathan prepared to leave the farm after a week of visits, Clara approached him. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with sincerity, "for everything you've done, for believing in us, and for helping us find our strength again." Jonathan smiled, feeling a rare lightness in his heart. "No, Clara, thank you. You and your children have reminded me what true strength is. I came here expecting to collect a debt, but I leave with far more than I ever imagined: friendship, gratitude, and the knowledge that courage can survive anything." As he rode away from the farm, Jonathan looked back at the small house, the repaired barn, and the children playing in the garden. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they were safe, thriving, and full of hope for the future. The journey that began with a simple debt had transformed into a story of resilience, trust, and the power of human connection. The Harper family had faced hardship, storms, and uncertainty, yet they had persevered. They had discovered that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found in courage, love, and determination. Jonathan had witnessed this transformation, and in doing so had been changed himself. He had learned that wealth and power were not the measures of life, but kindness, empathy, and the willingness to stand with others in their struggles were the true markers of strength. As Jonathan rode toward the horizon, he knew that Clara and her children would continue to grow, thrive, and face life's challenges with resilience and grace. And he knew that he would always carry the lessons of the Harper farm in his heart, lessons about courage, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit. For Clara Harper and her 5 children, the future was no longer uncertain. They had survived, learned, and grown stronger together. And in the quiet moments of reflection, they knew that even when life was difficult, they had the strength, courage, and love to face whatever came next. And so, the Harper farm stood as a testament not only to hard work and perseverance, but to the transformative power of hope, trust, and human connection. A young widow and her 5 children had survived against the odds, and they had done so with dignity, courage, and an unbreakable spirit.